Corbyn!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will join me in expressing our deepest sympathies to the people of Sulawesi in Indonesia following the earthquake and tsunami in which 1,500 people have died. We obviously wish them well on their rebuilding of their communities, and could we also take this opportunity to thank all those officers and ratings from the Royal Navy who did so much to help during the emergency at that time. Mr. Speaker, today is World Mental Health Day. And today, there are 5,000 fewer mental health nurses than there were in 2010. The Prime Minister said last week that austerity is over. When will austerity be over for the mental health services?
First of all, can I join the right honourable gentleman in expressing our condolences to those who were affected and our thoughts with all those who were affected by what happened in Indonesia. I'm pleased to say that obviously the Department for International Development was able to respond to that. I understand that the DEC appeal is now up to £10 million as well, and as the right honourable gentleman said, obviously we were able to put support in kind in through the support that was available from our armed forces and indeed from others, and I commend all those who have been working so hard in that area. Now, he raises the issue of mental health, and I'm pleased he's raised the issue of mental health, because this is a government that is actually ensuring that mental health is given the attention that it needs. It is this government that has ensured that there will be parity of esteem for mental health and physical health in the National Health Service, and it is this government that is putting record levels of funding into mental health. But I say to the right honourable gentleman, if he's saying to me, do we still need to do more on mental health? And I say, yes, we do. That is exactly why we are setting out further steps today, particularly to improve the mental health of children and young people. But also I'm very pleased that my honourable friend, the member for Thurrock, is taking on the responsibility as the Minister for Suicide Prevention, the first time a government has had a minister appointed to such a post. This government takes mental health seriously. That's why we're putting record levels of funding into mental health.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, it was a Labour amendment to the Health and Social Care Act that put parity of esteem on the face of the legislation. It was opposed by her government. And if she thinks that mental health spending is going well, then maybe she should have told the Health Secretary this, because this morning he said it's still way off where we need to be. The Royal College of Psychiatrists has found that income of mental health trusts in England was lower than it was 6 years ago, and children are being sent as much as 300 miles away for urgent treatment. It needs urgent action now. Mr. Speaker, people in every village, town and city know that violent crime is rising. 21,000 police officers have been cut. 7,000 police and community support officers have gone. When will austerity be over for the police?
First of all, in relation to the mental health issue, I've just said that I think there is more for us to do on mental health. And as part of our long-term plan for the National Health Service, we will be doing more for mental health. And I might remind the right honourable gentleman that our plans for the National Health Service will see £394 million more a week going into our National Health Service. He asked me about the issue of policing, and of course, what we have seen is this government has made, including the precept on council tax, has made £460 million more available for policing in this current year. And if he's so concerned about funding for policing, why did the Labour Party oppose that extra money?
Mr. Speaker, if austerity is over for the police, then it doesn't seem that she's told the Police Federation about this, because they are currently taking the government to court for failing to implement the decision of the independent pay review body. Our dedicated police officers and PCSOs deserve better than they get from this government. In the last year, Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In In the last year, the Education Secretary has been rebuked 4 times by the Statistics Watchdog for making false claims about education funding. I know the Prime Minister is a stickler for accuracy, so given her commitment to ending austerity, can she confirm that austerity is now over for all teachers who will receive the independently recommended 3.5% pay rise?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that as regards the issue of policing, and he talked about the police pay award, in fact this award does represent the highest consolidated pay award since 2010. Now he then goes on to talk about funding for schools and what is happening in relation to schools. He knows the announcement that has been made in relation to the Teachers' Pay Award, but I might just remind him that school funding this year is at a record high, with the extra 1.3 billion. With the extra 1.3 billion we've put in this year and next, per pupil funding is being protected in real terms. I recognise the pressures that schools are under, but I also recognise that we now see 1.9 million more children in good and outstanding schools compared to 2010. And part of that is because of the reforms we've put forward into education, including the free schools and academies, which the Labour Party would abolish.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Speaker, the reality is that over half of teachers are getting another real terms pay cut next year. They've been subject to 8 years of pay freezes and pay rises capped below inflation. It's no wonder there's a chronic shortage of teachers, and the government has again failed to hit its recruitment target for new teachers. Yeah. The Conservative leader of Northamptonshire said, and I quote, they couldn't cope with the levels of cuts. The Conservative leader of Somerset says, I feel abandoned. There are no solutions coming. So will the Prime Minister listen to her own council leaders and end austerity as she promised last week?
Well, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, first of all, in relation to teachers in our schools. In fact, there are more teachers in our schools now, and we see more people applying to be teachers. And I recognise the very hard work that our teachers put in and day out, and the good results that our children are getting are a result of their hard work and the hard work of their teachers. He refers to Northamptonshire County Council. Of course, the independent inspection was clear that failures at the council were not due to a lack of funding. We have backed councils. We have backed councils in England. Between 2015 and 2020, £200 billion are available to deliver the local services that their communities want to see. So we're going to see an increase of £1.3 billion in the money available to councils over the next 2 years. Extra money was announced at the conference at our party conference in relation to social care, and councils have access to over £9.6 billion of dedicated funding in relation to this. And there's a 31 million increase for rural services. Yes, we have had to make tough decisions, and yes, councils have been asked to make tough decisions. The reason we had to do that was because of the state of the public finances and the economy we were left by the Labour government. People have made sacrifices, and they need to know that their hard work has paid off. And yes, better times are ahead under a Conservative government.
It might be a good idea, Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister took a few minutes out of a very busy day to listen to some teachers and the stress they're going through, and the number of newly qualified teachers that feel they cannot carry on anymore and leave the profession that they love. The National Audit Office has found that local government funding from central government has been cut by 49% since 2010. And next year, government funding for councils is going to be cut by a further £1.3 billion. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has said that 75% of the social security cuts announced in 2015 have yet to come into effect. 2.7 billion will be cut from working age benefits next year alone. Can the Prime Minister confirm this swingeing austerity on the lowest paid and the disabled people in our society will now end, as she said last week?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that what we see in the changes that we're putting forward in relation to welfare reform is encouraging people into work and making sure that when they get into work, work pays. And I might also say to him that there are £2.4 billion of unclaimed benefits under the legacy system of the Labour Party that will be paid to people under universal credit. 700,000 people getting the benefits they're entitled to under universal credit for the future. And he asks me about what this government is doing in relation to the end of austerity, and I've been very clear that there are better times ahead for people. We will see debt falling, and we will see support for our public services going up. Austerity is being brought to an end. What is not being brought to an end is fiscal responsibility.
Mr. Speaker, the poorest third of households will lose £745 a year if these cuts go ahead. Just this week, and the Prime Minister should listen to them, the Equality and Human Rights Commission has reported the situation facing those with disabilities has got worse and their rights are being violated in our society. 8 years of painful austerity. Poverty is up. Homelessness and deaths on our street is up. Living standards down. Public services slashed. And 1 million elderly are not getting the care they need. Wages have been eroded. And all the while, Mr. Speaker, all the while, billions were found for tax giveaways for big corporations and the super rich. The Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister declared she is ending austerity. But unless the budget halts the cuts, increases funding to public services, gives our public servants a decent pay rise, then isn't the claim that austerity is over simply a great big Conservative con?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, actually wages are going up. We've increased the national living wage as well. There are 1 million fewer people in absolute poverty under this government. Under universal credit, 1 million disabled households will get around £110 a month more as a result of being on use of universal credit. And he talks about cuts. I'll tell him about some cuts that have been of benefit to working people in this country. What about the £18.5 billion of income tax cuts that have helped household incomes under this government? What about the cuts that those in their household bills that 11 million households will see as a result of our energy price cut? And what about the £46 billion of cuts through freezing fuel duty that has made a real difference to people's lives? But we know what would really hurt working people. Labour's plans would cost £1 trillion, £1,000 billion of people's money, uncontrolled borrowing, spiralling taxes, working people paying the price of Labour, yet again Labour taking us back to square one.